Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're back again here. Thomas, Alex, and me, Ricardo. Hi, guys.
Hi there.
Last video, we said that we're going to be talking about charts, but then we're all very excited about tables. So we talked for 40 minutes about tables. Let's try to keep the tables topics out for today's video. Sounds right?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
In the last video, we were talking about how many possible charts are in Data Studio, and we didn't even count all the community visualizations that are possible, which is a separate topic. But in Data Studio, it's possible to select all these different types of charts. But sometimes the general chart types are slightly different between each other, like stack charts and 100% stack charts, for example, very close to each other. But maybe we can go step by step about some of the more useful type of charts and some suggestions that we give as best practices for each. And I think after tables, the most common one that we use is either the standard bar chart or a time series. And I think we can start then with time series.
Before we start, a very important feature of tables were coming into my mind. No, just kidding. I think we talked enough about tables. Yeah, you can start, Alex. I talked so much in the last episode.
So time series charts, very easy. If you have time-related data, then you can choose it. You can, or you have to add a date to the dimension, but then you can say inside Data Studio in the dimension of which format or in which time frame you want it. So you can say, I just want to have it per daily or per year basis or per month basis or whatever. For example, Data Studio offers also a week format, but I think especially in week formats, we mostly use the ones from BigQuery, or we use our own week formats.
I have to say I'm not super up to date. I didn't check it over the last weeks, and hopefully nothing changed so far, but until some weeks ago, the week format was not really good.
Yeah.
It's super long and you cannot really use it in a good way.
So we mostly use the full year, empty space, then CW, and then the calendar week.
Yeah. I think we explained it in the very beginning of our video series when we talked about how to use BigQuery and Data Studio, how to prepare data. Or when you prepare all your data with BigQuery, like an analytical database, you can put as much columns inside your table you want. So what we do is we always have normally the date as our main time dimension, I would say. Yeah? And add the month, the week number, the week long, week short, whatever you want, create a single column for that. If you don't use it, it doesn't matter because you have columnar storage. That means if you don't select that value, or if Data Studio doesn't select that value or that dimension, then it will not be part of the cost and also not be part of the query you're running. Don't get basically confused there, and don't be too careful and think, okay, that's too much data. No, it isn't. Put it inside. It makes your life easier, and it makes your data visualization way nicer if you prepare your date, your month, your week, the way you would like to have it.
Or if you want to define the beginning of the year. So for example, if you want to say if a Thursday or whatever is the first day of the year, if it should aggregate to already a new calendar week or to the calendar week of the last year and so on. So there you can also differentiate, which is then important for revenue or something like that.
Think about what you can do, right? You can say, okay, how many days do we have from today till the date of that particular line, for example. So you can put so many stuff inside when it comes to calculating anything about dates. And for more details about dates, we will make an own episode because that will fill at least 20 to 30 minutes, I would say.
Yeah.
Time series. The same happened like with the table last time.
I have a first best practice about time series, which is often time series we use and we're showing the performance of just one metric across time. And Data Studio by default then shows you who's the legend, what that metric is. And then you have also the title with that metric. And then it's like the first thing, think about information density. If you're only showing one metric and your title is revenue of this year, and then you have a legend that says blue, revenue, and then you have the chart, which is a blue line and shows revenue. It's like, you can remove the legend that says revenue, make your chart larger, one of those defaults that I get why it's like that, but it's one of the first things that we remove from all the time series that we had, if it's just one metric.
So what I want quickly to mention is when you add, for example, a date range comparison to the time series search, which makes also sometimes sense. It's at first, it's a little bit hard to analyze it because then you have, for example, you say, okay, I want the revenue from the last 90 days. And then you say in the comparison date range, you set it to the previous period. So then you get also on the same date range, you get the revenue of the previous 90 days. It also is shown in the legend. But I'm not sure if you can change the color of the previous line because it's most of the time just something like a shade of the original column value or line. And that's sometimes a little bit tricky, especially if you have something like a light blue or something, and then it's getting lighter blue. Then it's hard to see that.
For this comparison things, I think it usually works out. The confusing part is when you have multiple metrics going together, no? A time series with more than 5 metrics, it's already confusing. Because especially like if they're like in different scales and then you have like 2 axes that sometimes it gets confusing quite quickly.
That's in general for every line chart, time series chart, whatever. If it's more than 5 lines, don't do it, right? Because it like gets super hard. And think about something like stacked or I don't know, that maybe does the job then better because you can also understand then how basically the values are compared to each other if you stack them. That gives you an additional problem because like the second, third, and so on, the way higher it goes to the stack bar, the harder it is to really understand like how big the size is. But we all know those line charts where you have 10 or more lines inside and they go like this here somewhere. It's just like big piece of mess. No one understands what's inside. The real like good people, they are also putting then a log scale inside that you really have no idea what the data is about. So don't do that. That's like, so everyone who looks at the data knows only 40 to 50% of what you know about the data. That's the first thing you should always have in mind, that you are basically the one who understands the visualization and the data the best.
General recommendation that I would make is that when displaying a metric that is the breakdown across categories, group the bottom whatever category. Show the top 3 as individual lines, and then the revenue of the however many categories side, you can put others, and that's it. And then it's easier to follow.
That's a very nice tip, to be honest.
How do you do it then? Do you have to create a calculated field in data?
Exactly. Yeah. Like that's what I would do. No, like show like these 3 and then create a calculated field.
Isn't there not also a built-in function for?
You can limit.
Send the rest, right?
You can limit. Like for example, you have like 20 and say like show only the top 3.
Yeah, but that's a good tip. That's a good workaround to make a calculated field.
Yeah,
that's really good.
And for that is super straightforward. You can check. I'm sure like Alex has written blog post around it, but setting that calculated field takes a few seconds only.
When we then reach 1 million subscribers on YouTube, then also your blog post will have a way bigger like impact. Yeah? So maybe you should check that.
This is when we suggest something that Alex hasn't written yet, but then because he's editing the video, he has time to write the blog post in the meantime.
But Alex, coming back to time series, because this is very basic.
So one video about time series.
Yeah. It's not a good day. Not a good day. What is the biggest difference between a common chart and the time series?
Yeah, so if you have time series data, you should be able to always also have the data for every date. I think you can also say that it should be something like to calculate the average between different points.
That's also possible? Yeah, that's a big difference.
So let's say you don't have the data in the 10th January and 14th January, but then after and before you have the data, then it calculates the average. So it just show the graph between them.
So first of all, it's 2 different things, right? You have the issue, what Alex mentioned, that if you don't have the data points, and sometimes it makes sense to, that it goes down to 0. And sometimes it makes sense if you take the average. For example, if one day is missing due to your log files were not like recorded or whatever, then probably an average makes sense. If your business was closed, an average might not make sense. It really depends on the use case. One big difference between like columnar charts and time series charts is in the columnar chart, you don't have a data entry for that. It's not even go down to 0. It's just not there. With the time series chart, you can make sure that every single day is inside your analysis and that you first of all see the whole part where data is missing or data goes down to 0. Because in the columnar chart, even if you group for the date, if 7 days are missing, it's simply not there. And with your first view, without analyzing it really like straight, you will not even not realize that days are missing, right? And that's basically the biggest difference. Imagine you do a weekly analysis and then you always like look for 7 day cycles and then 2 days for 1 week are missing. Then your complete like visualization will be wrong.
One then that I would add for this time series is to name the axis. It sounds super basic, but we have one axis, especially if we have 2 axes. Just put in the axis, put the name of it. So then it gives some structure to the chart that you're showing. And when you're showing your dashboard to the person who's going to be using it, just show them that when you hover over the chart itself on the day, the tooltip shows the value on that specific day. You know, it's actually quite a nice way. Like if you're having 2 lines and one is too low and you cannot really see the variations, like if you then hover over and move through it, you can see how the value specifically to that day is changing.
Can you also add 2 y-axis to the time series chart?
Yeah.
I think I never did it, but it could be that possible.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah,
answer that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did it, I think, for bar charts, but if it's also possible for time series charts.
Yeah. I think it only makes sense if you have 2 metrics. Like if you have more metrics, I would not do it because then it's confusing to see to which axis each of them are going. But for example, if you're showing revenue and number of units sold, then you can put revenue on the left y-axis and number of units sold on right y-axis. And then you can see like, hey, like usually like if it's similar product, you will see like something going consistency. But then if you have disparities, it means like, yeah, maybe we're making more money while selling less units. That will be a good insight to get from that.
It's just that no one is getting confused. You cannot add a second y-axis to bar charts. You mean column charts, correct? Because I always get confused with bar charts and column charts. So bar charts are the one like where every value is horizontally, and column charts are like
then I mean
vertical. Because I think with bar charts it's not possible, correct? Because it doesn't make sense at the end.
Yeah.
Because it's the y-axis is no, it only shows the values. What I wanted to say about filtering, because you talked about like time series filtering, date filtering. Use this built-in functionality that you can filter for time inside the chart. I'm not quite sure if you need to enable that in the config sections. In a column chart, it's also working, but also in the time series charts, click inside and drag along a certain range. And then it will automatically filter for that range, right? I think for a lot of chart libraries, that's possible. And sometimes some of you know that, some of you might not. But try it out.
At least you have then to add the cross filtering button you have to enable.
I'm not sure. Do you need to? This we have to check out. We are not sure because cross filtering is normally only if you would like to connect it to other charts. But we will check that for you and give you the result. Here. Maybe. I don't know.
Not again. Yeah, for bar charts, you also, or column charts, whatever, you have, as already Ricardo said, a lot of different possibilities, especially in terms of stack charts, 100% stack charts, and so on. Breakdown, dimensional breakdowns.
That goes into columnar charts. We can also tell you a lot about that. But a very general thing is reference lines. Maybe some words about reference lines, because when it comes to time series charts, a reference line makes sense.
You can now add one already in the Data Studio report.
Yeah.
Before, maybe also, or still, we add it already to the BigQuery table or to a calculated field inside Data Studio.
Exactly. It really depends. At the beginning, it was not possible in Data Studio. Then they started with like normal linear like reference lines where you could say, okay, this number. Now you can even set a target, which is even, can you set dynamic targets?
Yeah, you can, but I'm still not, or I'm already not sure exactly which limits it has and so on. I checked it one time, But you can also do some kind of dynamical.
I think the whole like reference line topic was improved over time, and put a reference line inside. The more complex it gets, sometimes it makes sense to make an own series for that, or an own like line for that, which you pre-calculate in BigQuery directly or in Data Studio. So we don't like to create any new data point in Data Studio. We do it basically directly in the database, but maybe it also does the job for you to do it in Data Studio if you have a very like lightweight dashboard.
What we did, for example, for one customer, when they want to add some targets, then we use, for example, a spreadsheet, and then they add the targets, and then we connect it to BigQuery and to Data Studio, because that is, especially when you have fluctuant targets for every day or at least for every week or whatever, then it makes no sense to add it inside your Data Studio report to add it there. So then just quickly add it to the spreadsheet, and then it's getting updated.
Also, never give access to someone who's not really familiar in the Data Studio topic. That's maybe a quite general thing, but sometimes we have to say it, because you could argue, okay, you have to change the target, only possible inside the chart configuration. Don't do it. Go to spreadsheet and give your team, your customer, whatever like you're working with, a spreadsheet where you say, okay, here, type in the date, type in the target value. For every date you have a target value, and if you missed basically one date, then we come back to the issue that you can say it falls down to 0 or it makes an average. Or you can also say, okay, for this particular chart, we have one target value, which is then at the level of 5, which is then just a linear like line. And also there, I would import the spreadsheet into BigQuery and not into Data Studio directly. I heard from a lot of customers that at a certain point it gets quite slow. Yeah, we don't have the best like feedback for integrating like bigger spreadsheets to Data Studio.
Came back briefly to the time series topic. One point to remember also to check always is that Data Studio by default has dynamic limits in the values that are in the axis, no? Like if you have, for example, revenue, and all the revenue is about 120 euros, and everything is, the maximum value is 150 euros, sometimes it caps that to that side, no? And to highlight how the movement is going. And maybe that's not what you want, no? Maybe you want to see, okay, from 0 all the way that. You can just go to the style section and change that the lower level is not automatic, but it's 0, or whatever number you want to have. And then keep that always in mind, depending on what you want to feel, no? Because maybe then you're gonna transmit the message that you have a lot of noise or a lot of variation, when there's really like your variation is happening between like a very tiny subset of a number that is huge.
Yeah. Data Studio is not really good at this maximum minimum access, because it needs to be a little bit more dynamical. If you have outliers, right, and those outliers are like 100 times, then your whole chart doesn't make sense anymore, because you cannot see something. But the moment you basically go for this maximum like boundary, or how do you say, limit, it's fixed. It's a fixed value. So if your data is changing and your, for example, sales, not talking about the outlier, but the normal sales, are improving by 200% or 100%, then yeah, your limit is wrong, and you need to manually change that, which is not good. And you cannot say, okay, make the limit based on a maximum or average or medium, or I don't know. It's not possible. You can only go for fixed value. This is not good yet. So the only possibility you have is like go for the auto value, or set your limit already like 200% higher. That might not happen, but still it can happen that then basically your data is going out of bound. So this is something we have to live with for the moment. There are also some workarounds on making the chart a little bit bigger or smaller, or you have to try a little bit around.
And also one thing which came in my mind when you speak about limits, about metrics and so on, when you have, for example, a column chart and you have 2 different graphs, so on the left and on the right side, you should, I'm not sure if you still should do it, or maybe Data Studio improved it already, but you should add a limit, or also a maximum and a minimum limit. Because else, if you have this grids at the background of the chart, then you get confusing in terms of the different lines of the values. So if you have, for example, revenue and order items, or items sold, And then you have for revenue, you have 100 million or whatever. And on the right side, you have just 100. Both axes are drawing their own grids into the chart. And then it's getting confusing how far. But for example, you can say, okay, you want to have steps every 100 million, every million in your left chart and your left axis. And for items sold, whatever, every 10 for every 100 items sold.
And the reference line on the left is gone.
Yeah, and then it's getting aligned again, and then you have no.
So what is the biggest difference between line charts and time series charts you mentioned already? Think about if you basically go for zigzag mode or if you go for more smooth lines. That's maybe a good thing. What are we doing normally? Zigzag?
Yeah, mostly I would
mostly,
say.
Right? One thing to mention is labels, data labels.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you basically create data labels normally?
Yeah, so mostly we say we want to show the data labels, but it depends on how many dimensional values you have and how big the number of the metrics is. One thing the Data Studio already improved here is that you also can now add compact numbers to the data.
Very important improvement.
Yeah. Because else it would overlap. So if you have 1 million revenue per week, per month, whatever, then it's getting overlapped if you have a lot of weeks or months in your dimensional values in the x-axis. But now you can compact it so that it's also 1M or whatever.
This feature is quite new. It's not that long ago.
We talked about it in the video, in the most important features.
Yeah. The color sometimes is a problem of your line. If you make a yellow line, then also the data label is yellow. Mm-hmm. Then think about that coloring scheme again. Can you go for decimal points, decimal numbers?
So
is that possible?
Yeah, you can say you just want to show, for example, for euro values or for currencies, just two digits after the that you can say. Yeah.
In general, when does showing the data values make sense? If you don't have too much lines in you, and if they are not overlapping too much. One thing where the Data Studio chart library is not good when it comes to those data labels is if those lines are overlapping, also the data labels are overlapping. Other chart libraries, they do it a little bit better. Then they say, okay, 3 lines are kind of overlapping. Then they basically stretch those data labels.
And they put it maybe also at the bottom, so under the line could also be. But all Data Studio always put it at front or at least a little bit at the top.
They have the security inside that they basically have a small gap in between. Data Studio doesn't. And then you cannot, if the last 3 lines are overlapping, you cannot see any data label. It also doesn't look that professional and good. And then sometimes we completely leave it out. A good workaround would be what Ricardo mentioned with top 3 plus rest.
Exactly.
So think about that. The rest should be maybe a little bit smaller or bigger than the other 3, 4, 5. So think about a little bit how to put the rest. Because if the rest, if your 3 basically lines are at around 10 and the rest is like 150.
I would say actually for me, like having this data labels, I rarely use them. I go more for like telling people to hover over the image, especially if it's like many points. Like Thomas says, it gets crowded quite quickly. I think it's hard to set a concrete guideline on this one. It's more about the feeling of how much you want to have. Taking back the point that you were saying about the sharp edges versus the curved ones, one difficulty that I've seen is that when the curve goes, like the value drops down to 0 and then goes back again, if you choose the curved ones, it makes this thing that is very annoying to me that moves the axis higher and starts showing negative numbers below. Like it looks like if, I don't know, and that's not nice if you have like revenue and it goes like to the bottom. It seems like something basic that should be fixed. There's no control in the styling section to do that. And that's immediate, like, first of all, it looks weird that it's one, you're used to having this just 1 quadrant and suddenly you have 2. It's like, why is happening in this new section there? And it just sends the wrong message.
Yeah, you also hear some things I also never recognized or thought about.
Because you make zigzag all the time.
Because Alex never goes to revenue of 0. Always to the top.
Alex doesn't like smooth lines.
No, I think that would be good. As always, thanks for the attention. Thanks for watching these videos. Subscribe, follow it. And Alex, what else should I do?
So you can also check, as we already mentioned, we made one video about the most important features releases of Data Studio and BigQuery. So we already mentioned some here, and you can check all of the other ones and get some more details there. Check our Medium blog post. We always put there for every month the biggest new releases. And check our LinkedIn posts and so on. And then, have a good day.
If we wear the same like sweaters every time, you don't need to say it again. You can use the same footage every time. Stay tuned. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.